weariness. The problem, which had been pressing on her brain for days and nights too, did not seem so impossible now, and hope was in her heart that somehow she would find a way out. It had been good to get away from the office and the busy monotony and go out into the wide, open out of doors. It was good also to meet a real nobleman, even if it were only in passing and on business. She decided not to tell her mother and the children of her outing yet, not until she was sure there were to be results. Besides, it might only worry her mother the more and give her a sleepless night if she let out the secret about the barn. One more little touch of pleasantness there came to make this day stand out from others as beautiful. It was when she turned onto Chapel Street and was swinging along rapidly in order to get home at her usual time and not alarm her mother, that a car rolled quickly past to the middle of the block and stopped just under a street light. In a moment more a lady came out of the door of a house, entered the car, and was driven away. As she closed the car door, Shirley fancied she saw something drop from the lady's hand. When Shirley reached the place she found it was two great, luscious pink rosebuds that must have slipped from the lady's corsage and fallen on the pavement. Shirley picked them up almost reverently, inhaling their exotic breath and taking in their delicate curves and texture. Then she looked after the limousine. It was 3 blocks away and just turning into another street. It would be impossible for her to overtake it, and there was little likelihood of the lady's returning for 2 roses. Probably she would never miss them. Shirley turned toward the house thinking she ought to take them in, but discovered that it bore the name of a fashionable modiste who would of course not have any right to the roses, and Shirley's conscience decided they were meant by Providence for her. So happily she hurried on to the little brick house bearing the wonderful flowers to her mother. She hurried so fast that she reached home 10 minutes earlier than usual, and they all gathered around her eagerly, as if it were some great event, the mother calling half fearfully from her bedroom upstairs to know whether anything had happened. She was always expecting some new calamity like sickness or the loss of their positions by one or the other of her children. "Nothing at all the matter, mother dear," called Shirley happily as she hung up her coat and hat and hugged Doris. "I got off earlier than usual because Mr. Barnard had to go away. Just see what a beautiful thing I have brought you. Found it on the street, dropped by a beautiful lady. You needn't be afraid of them, for she and her limousine looked perfectly hygienic, and it wasn't stealing because I couldn't possibly have caught her. Aren't they lovely?" By this time she was up in her mother's room, with Doris and Carol following close behind, exclaiming in delight over the roses. She kissed her mother and put the flowers into a glass beside the bed. "You're looking better to night, I believe, dear," said the mother. "I've been worried about you all day. You were so white and tired this morning." "Oh, I'm feeling fine, mother dear," said Shirley gaily, "and I'm going down to make your toast and poach you an egg while Carol finishes getting supper. George will be here in 10 minutes now, and Harley ought to be in any minute. He always comes when he gets hungry. My, I'm hungry myself. Let's hurry, Carol. Doris, darling, you fix mother's little table all ready for her tray. Put on the white cloth, take away the books, set the glass with the roses in the middle very carefully. You won't spill it, will you, darling?" Doris, all smiles at the responsibility accorded her, promised, "No, I ain't spill it. I'll move it carefully." There was something in Shirley's buoyant air that night that lifted them all above the cares that had oppressed them for weeks and gave them new hope. She flew around, getting the supper things together, making her mother's tray pretty, and taking little extra pains for each one as she had not felt able to do before. Carol caught the contagion and mashed the potatoes more carefully, so that there wasn't a single lump in them. "Goodness, but it's been hot in this kitchen all day, Shirley," said Carol. "I had the back door open, but it just seems stifling. I got the ironing all done except a tablecloth, and I guess I can finish that this evening. I haven't got much studying to do for to morrow. Nellie Waite stopped and left me my books. I don't believe I'll have to stay at home another day this week. Mother says she can get along. I can leave her lunch all ready, and Doris can manage." Shirley's conscience gave a sudden twinge. Here had she been sitting under a lovely tree by a brook eating her lunch and dreaming foolish daydreams about living in a barn, while Carol stayed at home from school and toiled in the kitchen. Perhaps she ought to have come home and sent Carol back to school. And yet Perhaps that nice young Mr. Graham would be able to do something. She would not condemn herself until the morrow, anyway. She had tried to do her best. She had not gone off there selfishly just to have a good time by herself when her dear ones were suffering. It had been for their sake. Then George came in whistling, and Harley banged in gaily a minute later, calling to know whether supper was ready. " 'Cause I got a date with the fellas this evening, and I gotta beat it," he declared impatiently. The shadow of anxiety passed over Shirley's face again at that, but she quieted her heart once more with her hopes for to morrow. If her plan succeeded, Harley would be away from " the fellas " and wouldn't have so many questionable dates to worry them all. George was in a hurry too. " Gee, Shirley, I got to be at the store all evening," he said, bolting his food hurriedly. " I wouldn't 'a' come home, only I knew you'd worry, and mother gets so upset. Gee, Shirley, what we gonta do about a house? It's getting almost time to move. I went to all those places you suggested at noon to day, but there wasn't a vacant spot anywhere. There's some rooms on Louden Street, but there's all sorts in the house. Mother wouldn't like it. It's dirty besides. I suppose if we looked long enough we could find rooms, but we'd have to get along with only 2 or 3, for they come awful high. We'd have to have 3 anyway, you girls and mother in one, us boys in the other, and one for parlor and kitchen together. Gee, wouldn't that be fierce? I ought to get a better job. We can't live that way." " Don't worry, George. I think we'll find something better," said Shirley with a hopeful ring in her voice. " I've been thinking out a plan. I haven't got it all just arranged in my mind yet, but I'll tell you about it pretty soon. You don't have school to morrow night, do you? No, I thought not. Well, maybe we can talk it over then. You and I will have to go out together and look up a place, perhaps," and she smiled an encouraging smile and sent him off to his school happily. She extracted a promise from Harley that he would be in by 9 o'clock, discovered that he was only going to a movie show around the corner with one of the fellows who was going to stand treat on account of a wonderful ball game they had won, found out where his lessons were for the morrow, promised to help him when he returned, and sent him away with a feeling of comfort and responsibility to return early. She washed the dishes and ironed the tablecloth so Carol could go to her lessons. Then she went up and put Doris to bed with a story about a little bird that built a nest in a tall, beautiful tree that grew beside the place where the little girl lived. A little bird that drank from a little running brook and took a bath on its pebbly shore, and ate the crumbs and berries the little girl gave it, and sat all day on 5 little blue eggs. Harley came in at 5 minutes after 9 and did his lessons with her help. George came home just as they finished. He was whistling, though he looked tired. He said the prof had been " the limit " all the evening. Shirley fixed her mother comfortably for the night and went at last to her own bed, more tired than she had been for weeks, and yet more happy. For through it all she had been sustained by a hope, inspired by a cultured, pleasant voice, and eyes that wanted to help and seemed to understand. As she closed her eyes to sleep, somehow that pleasant voice and those kind eyes mingled with her dreams and seemed to promise relief from her great anxieties. It was with a feeling of excitement and anticipation that she dressed the next morning and hurried away. Something was coming, she felt sure, some help for their trying situation. She had felt it when she knelt for her usual prayer that morning, and it throbbed in her excited heart as she hurried through the streets to the office. It almost frightened her to feel so sure, for she knew how terrible would be the disappointment if she got her hopes too high. There was plenty to be done at the office, a great many letters to answer, and a telegram with directions from Mr. Barnard, but she worked with more ease than for some time and was done by 11:30. When she took the letters out to Mr. Clegg to be signed, he told her that she would not be needed the rest of the day and might go at once if she chose. She ate her bit of lunch hurriedly and made herself as fresh and tidy as was possible in the office. Then she took her way to the 4th floor of the Ward Trust Building. With throbbing heart and glowing cheeks she entered the office of Walter Graham and asked for Mr. Sidney Graham. The office boy had evidently received instructions, for he bowed most respectfully this time and led her at once to the inner office. Chapter 4